Hello, Rosemary. How are you today?
I'm well. How about you?
I am well here. Just a little bit smoky from the fires in Washington and Oregon State coming up across the border. But Customs is slowing them down. So as they try to sneak apart. How are you where you are?
It's a beautiful day. Temperatures in the 60s. I just came back from a bike ride, and I thought this is just about perfect weather for a bike ride.
Oh, yes. I spent 3 days on a bike ride. Came back yesterday or Monday.
Good heavens.
Well, actually, it was a motorcycle, so it was cheating. Went up to an old mining ghost town and puddled through a 1800s cemetery. So it was kind of fun heading up there. But it's good to be back and looking forward to talking to you about this near-death experience.
Which is pretty dramatic.
It is. I've got a number of very, very well-known psychic friends who every time they've died, they come back with the best way of putting it is an upgrade in their abilities. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating how different people come back after dying. What was it that got you to where you ended up? Now, just so my listener knows, Rosemary, this kind of goes back even prior to you in your temporary passing away and crossing over. Your husband, he had an untimely death.
Yes, he was the man that I thought was the love of my life. I thought he was the answer to a lifetime of prayers, literally. I met him in my 40s and married soon thereafter, and he was my beloved husband. And then in April 2016, he was a lawyer, came home for lunch one day, sat down in a chair and put a Glock in his mouth and ended his life. And I lost my mind. I am a writer. I was a reporter for a time. I've written just about everything a person can write in the last 30 years. I've also written 9 books. So I'm your typical artistic, way too sensitive soul. So everything about this just sent me off the cliff. I lost my mind. I went down about as low as a soul can go. I was unable, not surprisingly, after he did this, I did not sweep in the house again after his funeral. And my background is in architectural history. So that house was very important to me. But after this, I wanted nothing more to do with it. So, yeah, I guess back in the day, we used to give people permission to have nervous breakdowns. And I suppose that's what I had. But I couldn't find a way to get comfortable. I literally felt like a wounded animal. And for a very brief time, I actually ended up living out of my car. It was a very nice car. It had heated seats and a sunroof and a Bose sound system. But a friend intervened, a friend on the periphery of my life. Because my friends, here my husband was a prominent attorney, and I was the writer who'd had some success in my fun little niche career. And now I was losing my mind. So all of our friends certainly disappeared. So a friend intervened and she said, "You're not going to live out of that car. That's not happening." And she invited me to come live with her. And she helped me. I lived with her 4 months. And I had lost the ability to eat solid food. I was living off liquid nutrition drinks. I went about as far as a person can go. And then inch by inch, I kind of thought I was getting better. Although one thing that was very vexing, I just wanted to die. Every night I would pray, "God, either heal me or let me die in my sleep. I can't take any more." And given that I wasn't, every morning I woke up, I was disappointed. Profoundly. So I made a plan to end my life. And that plan brought me I'm not even sure I should say this, but that plan brought me a lot of peace. It was a way out. So, but every day I fought those temptations. And then, I I was fighting that and kind of running out of road. I was relying on nothing fancier than human will to keep from ending my life. And by the way, an aside, suicide widows, as we're known, we are, depending on whose statistics you accept, we are 12 to 48 times more likely to commit suicide than the average population. Because, one, the pain is so great, and two, it seems like the only way out. So then came August 2018, and I was doing some yard work, and I felt something happen internally and went off to a gynecologist, and I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And then I was sent on for more tests. I was actually sent to an oncologist, and I was put in the hospital. It was a little outpatient thing. They were going to do a cervical biopsy to determine how far the cancer had spread. So that was the plan. And that's what took me out. I woke up from that. It's like a 20-minute procedure. It's really not a big deal, or it's not supposed to be. But yeah, when I woke up from that procedure, an RN roused me and said, it's time to go to the bathroom and, get yourself dressed. And I came back from that and told her, I said, look, I'm bleeding profusely. And she said, you'll be fine once you get home. And 2 more times, 3 times total. I said, nah, I'm 59 years old and this shouldn't be happening. But they sent me home anyway. And once at home, I wasn't home an hour before an ambulance was summoned, went to an ER. And it was at the ER they made a few more mistakes and sent me to my reward. I bled to death. That was the cause of my death. Actually, later it was affirmed my heart had stopped from catastrophic loss of blood.
Oh, wow. It's listening to you talk, it basically and describe the event itself, the suicide, and what happened to you after. I look at my police brain kicks in, and my experience with people who've gone through these things, and the need to step away, and the unfinished, the why, the constant question, why did he do this? Why did he do that? What am I going to do now? And you actually separate yourself from society. And
that's a good point.
It's very, very interesting when you look at it from the outside as a third party looking at it. You can actually see you're moving into a vehicle, you're moving into a car, you're basically wanting to end it, but you don't have, you struggle with the idea of actually ending your own life. So you're asking somebody else. In this case, you're asking God to take you. And then a friend of yours steps in and says, hey, I can give you a hand. You shouldn't be living in your car again, and come back. And all of a sudden you now have a support system that you didn't have before. And you have another human supporting, and you're close to that person. You're seeing that person basically all day if you want. And they're around to bounce questions off of and have conversations with and spin that around in your head. So for me, it's always interesting to look back, because I've investigated a number of suicides or apparent suicides, and the follow-up with the family going on years later and checking in on them and seeing how everybody's doing and the transition that they go through. And when you come up and say that, the suicide widows, that's an actual group. So now
yes.
you've become a part of a group again of something in common. So you create a larger family of people of like experience. So it's uplifting, and you get to a certain point though, and you probably felt this, that you've plateaued. You get to a point where, okay, I've grown, I feel a little bit better now, and then everything goes flat again. And that's actually just having a normal life, where the perception of going up higher, having a higher feeling on one day or having a low feeling on another day, you just, that plateau is actually back being normal. But it's your new normal.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the term new normal, because nothing will be normal again. My life is easily split into 2 bits, before April 2016 and after April 2016. And had my friend, and again, she was really on the periphery of my life, had she not intervened, because I also became addicted to prescription drugs and alcohol. Mm-hmm. And had she not intervened, I have 0 doubt I'd be dead. And then another friend, after 4 months with my friend Tracy, She said, it might be time for you to move into a home of your own, which is very reasonable. I mean, this was not intended to be a forever situation. And another friend came forward, and I shared a home with him because I was not able to care for myself still. No. And, if anyone listening to this is thinking about suicide, I can tell you, anybody that loves you, in fact, there's a quote from Red Reddington in, what's that movie with that show with James Spader? Oh, shoot. It's a very popular show with Red Reddington as the character and James Spader as the actor who plays him. But there's a scene where somebody's talking about suicide, and Red Reddington, the character, compares it to a suicide bomber. Somebody puts on a vest full of explosives, and he says those closest to the bomber are destroyed. Yeah. And even those on the periphery or on the outer edges are damaged for life. And my husband's last 4 words were a text to me blaming me. I mean, it just said, "This is your fault." And that was the last 4 words he ever articulated on earth. And that took me to the depths of hell. Because as a sensitive, empathic soul, it would have been more merciful if it would have been more merciful for my life to end that day as well. So 2.5 years later, I'm still praying every night. In fact, I had 3 prayers: God, either heal me or let me die. 2, spare me the life review. And people think I'm joking. I am not. I had been afflicted by the most horrific nightmares. And you mentioned your other career as in law enforcement. There are things that happen to the human body, certainly in a suicide by gunshot, that no one's really designed to see. We're not supposed to see violence on that level. And the nightmares were, I hated being awake and I hated being asleep. That's why death seemed like the only respite. Because in my nightmares, too many times to count, I came home and I came around the corner just as he's putting that gun in his mouth, and I scream, "Please don't." And in the nightmares, I'm always too late. And I must have had that nightmare over and over and over, or some derivation thereof. So it just was doing me in. So the second prayer was no life review. And then the third prayer was, there were a lot of legal messes to clean up after his death. And there were a lot of very weighty decisions that had to be made. And my third decision was, please, I can't face any more difficult choices. They were agonal, just agonal. And oh my gosh, and people who want to support somebody who's been through a tragedy of this magnitude do not offer advice unless you have been through a very similar experience. A lot of people say, well, you should wait a year before you make any big decisions. You know what? When your husband blows his brains out, that's not an option. Maybe if he'd gone in a hospital bed and it had been peaceful and we'd had some preparation, but nope. So a lot of people just made things worse with their inane and even foolish comments. So that was one of my prayers: is no more decisions. I can't handle anymore. I was overloaded. So even at 6 months out, my friend, we shared a rental home, and he helped me. He helped me with minor tasks like eating. And he would make dinner every night. And I lost a great deal of weight at this time. He would make dinner every night and literally put a plate beside me wherever I was. And he'd say, I know you have a lot of trouble eating, but just try for Teddy. My dog is Teddy. He'd say, just try for Teddy. Eat 1 bite, just 1 bite. I just wish I could grab people and do a Vulcan mind meld of what suicide does to the survivors, because it eviscerated me. It absolutely destroyed me. So when I look back at my journal, shortly before I died from this cervical biopsy, bled to death and died, I wrote in the journal just days before this whole cancer thing began. I wrote, this is my gratitude list. I wrote, I did not kill myself today. It was a win. And then I wrote, God, please save me from these devilish temptations. Because killing myself just seemed so easy. It just seemed like such a simple solution. And the only reason that I did not was because I knew my whole life I had devoured near-death stories, in book and film and any article, everything. And I knew that it violated the spiritual contract. And that was the only reason that I didn't put a bullet in my head. And boy, was it tempting. So yeah, that was the easy path. For me, the harder path was to somehow try to see this thing through. So when I was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer, I was enraged with God, just enraged. I thought, okay, what else do we have for Rosemary? What else are we going to do to torture her to death? And I mean, I was just beside myself. So when I am in that second hospital of the day in the ER, and I tell them, I think I'm bleeding to death. They also, I don't think they understand the gravitas of the situation. And I remember I grabbed the hand of this very kind-hearted, sweet-looking RN to my left. I'm on a gurney. She's to my left. And I said, promise me you're not going to let me die. And she said, oh, honey, we have many solutions for this. We're not going to let you die. And it was like a mother talking to her child. I mean, I felt the love behind the words. So they packed me with gauze, which it turns out was a catastrophic mistake because that didn't stop the bleeding. It just stopped the mess. And then they stepped out of the room. And they left me in this ER cubicle. My friend Milton, he was the one that was living with me. He was there at my side, and they hooked me up to a blood pressure cuff and a little pulse ox for my finger. And they left, shut the door, walked out of the cubicle, left. My friend Milton said he was watching that blood pressure monitor, and then he said it wasn't long before he looked up at it, and my blood pressure was 32/25. So I was pretty far gone at that point. He said, and then your eyes popped open. And he said, you tried to sit up on the gurney, which is pretty impressive at 32/25 of blood pressure. And he said, you reached up to heaven. And he said, you talked to somebody only you could see. And you wiggled your fingers. He said it was almost like a child reaching up to her father. And he said, and then he just plopped back down on that gurney. And that's when my blood pressure went to error, which meant it was probably lower than 32/25. So I think that's probably when I left for heaven. And now I don't remember reaching up to heaven and wiggling my fingers. I don't remember any of that. But I remember I was in a deep, dreamless state of unconsciousness. And I woke up at the moment of my death, and I woke up being catapulted out of my body, and it was very dramatic. And this is hard to articulate, but it was as though there was a sinewy, silvery cord from the crown of my head to the back of my heels on my feet, like an archer's bow that somebody had pulled back and popped. And with that pop, I went flying out of that body. And then I was floating. And I was floating in this perfect blackness. But it wasn't just blackness. It was actively comforting me. And I felt the most incredible peace times a billion. And a lot of people, when they die, they talk about the love. I had the great blessing of a mother who loved me. But I had never known peace. As a writer, as a sensitive soul, I've always suffered with anxiety and fear and worries and woe and all that. I've always been a very anxious person. So this peace, I remember thinking, I've always wondered what I would look like without any fear or anxiety. I thought, this is great. This is great. And I thought about the Bible verse. Paul writes, the peace that passeth all understanding. And I thought, this is that peace. This is what Paul was talking about. You can't describe it. You can't define it. You can't explain it. So as soon as I pop out of my body, one of my first thoughts, and I'm floating away in this blackness, one of my first thoughts was, my heart has stopped. And I thought, wow, how do I know that? It's almost like a surprise that I heard myself say it. And I thought, I don't know how I know it, but I know that's right. I know my heart has stopped. And then I thought, wow, I'm dying. And then I thought, no, actually, ever the writer, I thought, you're not dying, you're dead. And it cracked me up. I cracked myself up. I laughed out loud, and I heard myself giggle. And I thought, I don't have breath sounds. I'm pretty sure I don't have lungs, and I'm pretty sure there are no vocal cords, but I'm producing sound, and I'm hearing sound, and I sound just like I sound in real life. And by now I'm realizing I have the memory of the Bible verses. I have still an intense intellectual curiosity. I still have my voice. I sound like I sound now. I have my funny little giggle, and I'm already thinking, what did I leave behind on that gurney? And I thought, nothing. nothing that is me. It was left behind. Everything we are goes with us, even down to our funny little giggle. And that was profound. That I thought, this is great. This is great. You know, it's funny. So many people say, well, you probably wanted to come back. Oh, heck no, I did not want to come back. In fact, as I was floating, I remember thinking, I like floating. Floating is fun. This is great. And as a writer, if I was going to come back and tell this story, I would have used much better language than I like floating. Floating is fun. That's a little simplistic for somebody who's a wordsmith. But one of the, still within this blackness, by the way, the predominant feeling I had was gratitude. I remembered that I was supposed to start chemo, 10 days away. I remembered that I was supposed to start radiation 10 days away. I remembered the sadness, the emotional angst, and I just felt so grateful. I was done. It really felt, no kidding, it really felt like I had been granted early release for good behavior. I thought, I am dead, and I did not do this by my own hand. And I just was so grateful it was over. I cannot articulate that enough. I was relieved. And while still floating in this comforting, comfortable, beautiful blackness, I felt a presence join me, and she was to my left and much, much taller than me, and a very powerful presence. And I turned to my left to look, and I thought, how fun that I'm looking over my left shoulder, and yet, do I have a left shoulder? I don't know. I'm in the blackness. But I said, literally, with a lilt in my voice, I said, and who are you? And the answer came before I could even finish articulating that. The answer was, you, Rosemary. You are the image and likeness. I'm the original. And I thought, wow, that's Genesis 1, I think 26. I thought that would have been great to know back there, but that's still really cool. And it came with the only way I know to describe this is like with an infusion of understanding. These weren't just words. The Bible says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. That's what these words were. These were the words that started the universe. That's the power of these words. And it was just such a wonderful experience. And if you told me I'd been dead for 2 months, I'd believe you. It just went on and on and on. And then at some point, and I don't remember really, I don't know how this happened. I ended up in a white room. And I don't remember the transition from the floating in this perfect, beautiful blackness to being in this white room. And I was on my feet. And it was the only corollary I can come up with. It's like somebody took my batteries out. And I think something happened between the black room and the white room. And I think that God in his grace or mercy or whatever said, we'll talk about that later. You're not going to remember this. But anyway, I was in a white room and I was on my feet, and I thought, wow, I'm on my feet. And this white room was the most perfect white you can imagine. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, all of it was this almost bluish, so brilliant white light, luminescent, iridescent, white room. And there were no light fixtures. It was the walls and the ceiling were creating this brilliant but not painful whiteness. And in this room, I saw a door ahead of me, and I thought, I don't know if I have feet, but I think if I have an intention to advance toward that door, it will happen. And it did. I don't know if I was walking, but within this room, it was like I was in a fog. But it wasn't a fog. It was light. It was like itty bitty. I know this is hard to conceptualize, but it was like I was in a heavy fog, but it wasn't a fog. And I strained to see an individual droplet of this vapor. And I felt like I ought to be able to see an individual droplet. And an angel or spiritual being that was with me said, your spiritual eyes haven't acclimated to this, and you can't focus on it yet. But these are droplets of light falling all around you. And the angel said, before you can go to heaven, you have to be purified of all the muck. And that's the word that was used, all the muck of earth. And that's the purpose of the white room, is to remove all that filth and muck and your sins and your husband's sins and the sins of the world and any physical disease process that's been imprinted on your consciousness so deeply that you think it's part of you. I was being prepared for heaven in that white room. And as I walked through this mist danced around me and swirled around me, and it's too beautiful for easy explanation. But I got to that door and I paused and I said, is this the divine will for my life? That a simple medical mistake would take me out. And I didn't get any farther than, is this divine? And the answer was immediate. And the answer was no. But whatever you decide, you go with all of God's grace and mercy and blessings and care and love. There is not a wrong decision. And that was an answer to that third prayer. I mean, this seems like a pretty big decision, whether you decide to go on to heaven or go back to earth. And I was being spared that. I was told, whatever you decide, it's okay. No wrong decisions. So at that moment, I thought, I'm on it. I'll take heaven. I do not ask me to go back. I don't want to. This is great. It's over. And at that moment, I had a vision, an image of that sweet RN that had held my hand before I lost consciousness at that little ER. And I saw her sitting on a metal stool in like a hospital supply room or a back room surrounded by linens and supplies. And she was leaning forward on this little stool, sobbing uncontrollably with her head in her hands. And I saw her. I saw her very clearly. And she said, through tears, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die. And I lost her. And I thought, oh, come on. Don't do that to me, please. And then I thought, well, she's an RN. She's probably been through this a few times. And I thought, I know that this will hurt her, but I need to go. I can't face life anymore. I remember what I had been through. And then I felt the pain she was experiencing, and it was the same agonal grief that I had known for 29 months since my husband had ended his life. And that's when I literally I had my right hand up, pretty interested by the fact that I was using my right hand to push through that door, but I put my right hand back at my side, and it's kind of funny now, but I said, this is going to ruin her day if I die. And boy, I tell you, in a millisecond, I was back on that gurney. Lots of action happening all around me, in the hospital. And people say, oh, I bet you were so grateful to be back. Nope. My first reaction was, oh, come on. I thought we were going to talk about this. What happened? You know how much work it takes to die? So I was hastily transported by ambulance to another hospital. And I think the reason that ER knew they made a pretty big mistake. And, one of the interesting asides to this, after Milton, my buddy, watched me die in that cubicle, he said it took about 2 minutes for them to return to that room. And he said, you were literally white as a sheet. He said, you hear people say that, but you don't know what it looks like. It looks very weird. And he said, your lips were blue and dark blue, and under your eyes were bluish. So he got shooed out into the hallway once the doctor came in. And the backstory to this, my buddy Milton has certainly shown me great kindness to take care of me during this time, but he was an avowed atheist. Very, very clear thinking, very confirmed, devout atheist, if an atheist can be devout. In fact, he used to get a magazine called American Atheist, which cracked me up. But while he was in that hallway, he told me later, he said, because I had asked him, weren't you terrified? The person that you tried to keep alive for all these months is now dead. You saw me die. You saw the blood pressure and the vitals go to nothing. Weren't you terrified? And he said, almost quietly, he said, I guess I had a few angels of my own. And I said, oh, do go on. And he said, while he was in that hallway, He said it was as if somebody draped a blanket of calm and peace around his shoulders and said to him, "It's okay. We just need her for a few minutes. She'll be back." And he said it changed his life. And he went out, this is kind of funny. After he heard this, he went out in the lobby to get himself a soda. He said it had been a long day. And I said, "What?" He said, "Well, the angels were pretty clear that you'd be back." And I tell people now he was in the blast radius. And so that man went from an atheist to a believer in about 2 seconds. And by the way, this has been 2 years now, 2 years and a couple weeks. He is still quite an amazing man, and often texts me or calls me with inspired things he's read or heard or learned that are very helpful. So this changed him as well. And it changed me in a lot of ways. As soon as I came back from this, I realized I was different. I wasn't sure if I was even alive. I wasn't sure. It's very off-putting when you're dead and then you're alive again. I was kind of disoriented. People say they feel like they're 50% in that world and 50% in this one. I felt like I was 95% in that world and 5% in this one. And the angels for the next few days literally swarmed me. They sang me songs, and it was the most beautiful music a human being could imagine. And I would tell the angels, I'd say, I'm really, really good with architecture and with houses, not so much with music. I don't think I'm going to be able to remember the lyrics, the melody. And the angels told me, they said, "This is not for you to remember. This is for your healing. This is for your peace. This is for your joy. This is for us saying, it's good you came back. And here's what life is going to be like. It's going to be like angels singing to you." So I was in the hospital for 4 days, and then I went home. And as soon as I got home, I started selling off all of my worldly possessions. I would stand over I had all kinds of furniture and stuff. I would stand over each item and say a prayer. And I would say, this item has brought me so many blessings. May it bless just the right person now. So I kind of emptied out my house, item by item. And then I sold my car back to the dealership. I only had that car 8 months. And then I sold my house. And my house sold in 2 hours after I listed it. And then I had purchased a slightly used Prius, and I got in that Prius and I drove 1,000 miles due west to start a new life.
Wow. We are talking to Rosemary Thornton about a near hat. If you want to follow her on Facebook, you can. Just bounce over to Facebook. Now, we're going to talk about her website a couple of times during the program here, but it's under modification, hasn't been completely modified yet over to where she's going with her upcoming book. But her website is Sears Homes, all one word, searshomes.org. And if you want to get a hold of Rosemary and ask her some questions yourself, feel free to bounce over to that website and get a hold of her through there. Rosemary, driving back a little bit more, what did the angels look like to you? Or can you describe what they look like?
Well, it's funny. People have asked me, that's probably the most frequently asked question is, what did they look like to you and to Milton? To me, they were tall. They were tall beings of light in kind of a quasi-human form. And yet I could not discern a specific human physique, but it was just like a beam of light, a beam of living love, of living light. And when they sang, they got more sparkly, and the sparkles moved with more energy. And they were singing, praising God and glorifying God. And it was, I would sob when they sang. I'm sorry. There's only 3 things that make me emotional in retelling this story, and one is Milton, one is the angels singing, and 3 is the no choices at the door. But yeah, the angels singing was quite something. But yes, they sang beautifully, and it was something else. It was just something else.
Going back in the memory of, I know you can't remember the words or things like that, but do you recall a lot of that singing in tones? Like tonal, more as opposed to constant words. the music was coming in like a tone and like very like the old.
Right. Yes, the meditation of Om.
Yeah.
I would say it was, and again, I think our near-death experiences are very customized. For me, it was like hearing the hymns on the most beautiful pipe organ, and the singing was very lyrical. There were specific lyrics, and when they would sing to me, like I said, they got more sparkly. It's like their sparkles were energized. I would sob. And I'd say, please don't stop. It's I have a background in ham radio. Are you familiar with ham radio?
Yes, I'm old too. Yeah.
It was like putting 100,000 amps through 60 amp service. It was almost too much.
See,
I cried.
The reason I was pointing that out, or trying to dig down a little bit further into that, because I've been around sound healers. And like when you say on one of those old pipe organs, the long drawn out notes.
Yes,
a long drawn out note at a certain frequency is healing for certain parts of our own energies. And I was just curious if that was kind of part of your healing, the music and song itself.
Yes, I would say that's a good description. I mean, I wasn't hearing a pipe organ, but I was hearing music that was too beautiful for Earth, too beautiful to be of Earth. And what's interesting is I had three faithful friends who spent a lot of time with me at the hospital. Because when you're at a hospital, and I was down a lot of blood. And you're still a little disoriented. And plus I was, living half in heaven, more in heaven than earth. But the singing only happened when nobody was in the room. And I think it was the angels' way of saying, you're not alone. We're right here. We're watching over you. You're not alone. And another interesting thing, for the first 24 hours after I was back in the hospital, I felt internally that things were wrong. And there was an expectation. The blood work showed that I'd had a heart attack, and then my heart stopped because I had the elevated enzymes. And there was an expectation that there'd be an awful lot of things wrong with me. I was without a heartbeat for more than 10 minutes. And the interesting thing about bleeding to death is they can't even do CPR because the risk is that you just bleed. They're pushing out more blood. So I had an ER doctor tell me that I talked to later that they have to kind of seal the tank first, seal the leak, refill the tank, and then get the heart going again. So I was there was an expectation for a 59-year-old woman to bleed to death, have a heart attack, and die, that there'd be a lot of subsequent problems. And when they're wheeling me down the hospital hallways for, test and check my heart and all this other stuff, I said, oh, it's okay. The angels said if I agreed to come back, I'd be A-okay. We don't need to do these tests. But they did anyway. And the report was always the same. Mrs. Thornton, you're a very lucky woman. Everything seems fine. You seem to be in all of your organs are fine. And there was concern about the kidneys, the heart, and of course the brain. We believe that 3 minutes without oxygen and your brain is mush. And none of that happened. But I was promised that if I came back, everything would be fine. And then ultimately, it took a lot of tests, and they had to wait for me to heal from the blood loss, but ultimately it was affirmed that every vestige of the cancer was gone, which is pretty dramatic. That was a big deal. Oh,
yes. When you have stage 2 cancer and then it disappears because you had a bleeding.
Right.
And not an old historic leaching, but you had a full-on hemorrhage. That goes in the side of the book we call miracles.
Yes, and you have to lose a lot of blood for your heart to stop. The next morning when the hospital doctor, which, by the way, finally, when I was put back into the hospital, so I had 2 hospital visits on September 5th, and then I was taken by ambulance to the hospital where all the fun started, they finally gave me a doctor that was very compassionate, very intelligent, very competent. And that first morning, he sat me down and he said, Mrs. Thornton, you've had a heart attack. And I said, doctor, you've got the wrong patient. I bike ride, I walk, I'm very active. I'm quite confident I did not have a heart attack. He said, no, your enzymes are elevated. They've already started coming back down, which tells us it is not underlying heart disease. And I said, what are we talking about? And he said, well, you lost so much blood, your heart went into VFib and then stopped. And I said, well, how much blood do you have to lose for that to happen? And he said, more than 40%. And I said, well, how much more than 40%? He said, at 40%, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So they couldn't really quantify how much I'd lost. But it was enough to make my heart stop. And that is medically documented. So that's pretty cool. So when I'm floating away from my body in that blackness and I say out loud, my heart has stopped, that was right. And what a friend shared with me, and this was very helpful, I still had quite a psychic connection to my body. So I knew what was happening back at that dead body. I knew what had happened.
Yeah, we do. Even though our energy is using this meat sack to move around day to day, at least we have some idea of the inner workings of it. Maybe not consciously, but the energy that occupies it.
Yes.
Should definitely know, which chunks are which chunks are working, which chunks aren't. You said something interesting earlier. I want to ask you, what the angels look like. You said will look like to you or look like to Milton. Well, did they look different to Milton?
They did. He is in IT. In fact, one of the favorite quotes I have from Milton, he does computer stuff. He said, you got rebooted by the creator, which I just loved that. As to I've asked him, being a former journalist and somebody who writes books, I really drilled deep trying to ask him, tell me, I want to know every single thing about this angelic encounter. And I did this as soon as I was out of the hospital. I interviewed him, and of course I dated it and, et cetera. But what he told me is he said, I can't describe it as a being. I describe it best as a feeling. But he said it was like somebody put a big warm blanket around my shoulders and drew it tight. And it was just a blanket of peace and calm and comfort. And it was, he said I was standing in that hallway thinking, what do I do now? She's dead. And he said it wasn't, he said he didn't have time for two of those thoughts before he felt this peace just envelop him. And he said, and it wasn't a spoken voice, but it was an information download almost of, we just need her for a few minutes. She'll be back. And he was so comforted by that. Like I said, he went out and got himself something to drink in the lobby. But he said it was, and it was so clear. He said it wasn't like, oh, I hope I heard the angels right. He said it was, well, of course, she'll be back. It's all going to be okay. She'll be back. And when I said, you got a soda, I wasn't in there getting a strep throat test. I wasn't in there for them to take some blood. You saw me die. And he said, well, the angels were pretty clear. But yes, he did not have a vision, but he said he'd never had an experience of just being enveloped by peace like that. And it changed him. He's a different man.
And you walked out of the room changed too. You said you started selling off of your personal possessions.
Well, I rolled out of the room, right?
Rolled out of the room, yeah.
But yeah, I was in the hospital for about 4 days. And yeah, as soon as, it's kind of funny. As soon as I got home, because, 4 days, you're ready to be home. I actually really liked the hospital because I had been terrified of hospitals. I mean, just terrified. And I realized that the love of God and the presence of angels can be right there at your hospital bedside as much as they can be in the most beautiful church or in the most beautiful park or in the most beautiful sunset. So that took away a lot of that terror, all of it. But yeah, when I got home and I hop out of the car, not hop, but gently get out of the car, and I had several mole traps in my backyard because I had a beautiful lawn in suburbia, and the moles were making a mess of my yard. So I had set these mole traps. Well, when I get back from the hospital, I'm like, egads, those things could hurt somebody. And by hurt somebody, I mean a fuzzy little four-legged mole. So I, even still weak from, I'd been on total bed rest for 4 days, and I've been told to go home and go to bed. I went out and I took the tip of my foot and I pried those mole traps out of the grass because the idea of killing a mole was just abhorrent to me. It was horrible. What was I thinking? And then, I was at home and I had a lot of visitors. The hospital, this is pretty interesting. The hospital actually wanted to discharge me to what we generically call a convalescent center, which is a nursing home. And fortunately, friends and myself, we were able to cobble together kind of a care plan. But they told me, this is the other fun PS, is they told me it'd take about 2 to 3 months for my full good health to return because I had a very, not surprisingly, a very dramatically low red blood cell count and white blood cell count. And in fact, I wanted to stay at the hospital a couple extra days because bleeding to death is not painful, but it's terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying. It's amazing how much blood can come out of the human body. It is, and as I guess former police officer, you probably know that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it comes out in different colors from different places, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, it was pretty unnerving. But they kicked me out of the hospital on day 4 because they said, because I talked to this lovely doctor, so I don't want to go home. I might start bleeding again. And he said, your white blood cell count is so low that you're now at risk for MRSA or other opportunistic infections. And he said, if that happens, we're not going to be able to save you because your body has no resources to fight it. And I said, I'm out of here. So at home, I continued to pray. And by the way, I did a lot of praying throughout this and had friends praying for me. And then at 10 days, it was 12 days, I went back for blood work. And after they reviewed my blood work at day 12, they said, there's a mistake in your blood work. And I said, what's the mistake? And they said, well, your numbers, they're all textbook perfect. And I said, oh yeah, the angels told me they'd take care of it. They said it would all be fixed. And the doctor said, this is impossible. And I said, well, I'm back on my bike again. I feel fine. And she said, you're what? And I said, yeah, I'm back, right, small, gentle, easy rides. But yeah, I'm back on my bike and the breathlessness is gone. So that to me is also an amazing part of the story. There was an expectation to take 2 to 3 months, and in 12 days, the numbers were perfect. Textbook perfect. I love that.
And textbook perfect, and somebody else is writing a new textbook now because we'll call it the Rosemary Thornton textbook of what the hell happened to her.
Oh, what the heaven. So, the other PS to this is ultimately there was a second surgery to affirm that the cancer was gone. And I ended
that would have been a little bit stressful. Oh, we're just going to do surgery on you again, but everything will be fine. Yeah, I've heard that. What? How many times before?
Well, what's funny, I had to find another oncologist because the first one insisted I go forward with the chemo and the radiation that had been all scheduled and set up. And
because they already
I thought,
payments. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought, I don't think I want to do that until we make sure. I said, I think I've heard those angels pretty clearly, but he was very firm in his belief that that was the smart thing to do. So I found another oncologist, and they insisted on waiting a handful of weeks because I was still telling everybody who'd listen, I died, I went to heaven, I floated in the blackness, I saw the white room, I talked to the angels, it was great, I came back changed. And the doctor was the second oncologist. She was a lot more interested in the fact that I bled to death from a cervical biopsy. She wanted to talk about that a lot more. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, the second surgery, she insisted on having 2 pints of blood in the room on standby. And as it turned out, they were not needed. But she was a wonderful woman. She said she was also praying for me. She said, my reputation is on the line. You've seen the great Dr. Fill in the blank from this city who's well known throughout the state. And if you're wrong, I'm going to be the one who, backed up the crazy lady who said she was healed in heaven. So after that second surgery, she actually took a lot of flesh from a lot of places and biopsied it while I was unconscious. And she said, Rosemary, if I find cancer, we're going to take the lymph nodes too, because we have to find out how far this has gone. And so when I went unconscious for that second surgery, I was terrified. I really was. But my buddy Milton, again, is the one waiting for me in the waiting room. He said she burst through the doors after the surgery, threw her arms around his neck, and said, she's right. Not one cell. Nothing.
Oh, wow.
And what she said, the PS to this, she said, in fact, her flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect. I don't think she ever had cancer.
Interesting.
Yep. And yet I had 2 biopsies and a physical exam. The second physical exam, the oncologist had told me it is advanced to a point where the flesh is distorted. And I had started the process of going to a doctor because I had some symptoms. I had been bleeding, so I knew something was wrong. And by the way, all those symptoms, I had a fever, I had a sore throat, I had some muscle pain in my legs. All that stopped when I came back from heaven. It was all gone.
It comes back. I keep going over in my head at the beginning when you were like praying to leave.
Yes.
Like, please take me, please take me, please take me. And then possibly a mechanism was put in place to be taken. And you got up to a point where you're saying, see, this is what could happen. You can go, but it's up to you. And you asked for it.
But that business with the nurse was kind of a sneaky maneuver.
Yes, it was.
The way to an empath's heart.
That whole working in mysterious ways things. It's now what you're doing with the information you have and what you're doing in this next chapter of your life with that information. It's, maybe, okay, it's like, the kid wants to eat all the cake. You give him the kid the cake, and then he gets sick and going, see, I told you, but you had to learn on your own.
I guess, but I was hurting. I was hurting so bad. I love this man who did this thing, and you can't. You are in a unique position to understand how your husband, how seeing the things that happen after a suicide mess you up.
Well, yeah, that's your PTSD.
Right.
That's your full-on post-traumatic stress, all the symptoms afterwards, all how to deal with things. I can imagine, this is one of the things that I feel glad you had a Milton with you, because one of the biggest parts of your PTSD would be, and people who've never experienced this don't understand it, is literally paperwork. Huh. You have to fill out this form. It comes and you just push it to the corner of the desk.
Huh.
And you need somebody else either to do it or to put it down in front of you and say, sign this, check this box, I will mail it for you. And dealing with an estate, dealing with all the legal side of things, every piece of paper is a trigger.
That's true. That's fascinating, because that's exactly what he did. He would have me, and this is how much I trusted this man, he'd have me sign a book of checks, and he'd say, we have to pay the bills. We have to pay the bills. We have to pay this attorney. We have to do this. And I would just walk around the house crying, saying, I can't. So he stepped in and he took care of all of those details. The first 2 months I could not drive. I've always, I took auto tech in high school. I've always had a thing about cars. I lost the ability to drive a car. How messed up is that? I just couldn't. I just couldn't put it all together. And honestly, in retrospect, it's more like I had a stroke. And I think, again, that's part of the trauma and the PTSD. Your brain just gets fried. I lost the ability to read for 2.5 years. I could look on a page and I could see there's a whole bunch of words, but it's like somebody took all those words and put them in a bucket and threw them against the wall. And I'm like, yep. Right. I don't know what they're saying here. This is embarrassing. A year out, I handed him a cake box. I was trying to make a cake. First time I stood at the stove in a year. And I handed him the box and I said, there's a recipe here. but it's stuff about eggs and oil and water, and I don't know what it's trying to tell me. Please help me. I mean, I've written 9 books. I've written hundreds of articles, and I couldn't read the recipe on the back of a cake box.
Yeah.
That's what PTSD or trauma, whatever you want to call it, does to your brain.
That post-traumatic stress digs. It's amazing. I went through it, and in as a policeman, it's not from what you've seen or what you've done, but it's how management or an authority within the system treats you as a result of what you've seen or what you've done, which is the weirdest thing. And you can get into, on the whole, it's in my experience too, only empaths suffer from PTSD, which is a whole other conversation, because we're always trying to do well. We're always trying to say, look, this is what I did. I did a good job, right? I'm supporting you, or I'm supporting this. This is what I did. And if somebody slams that down, now you get a trauma like you experienced, then you saw the aftermath, then everything that flows from, like, it's the drop of water in a pond. Everything that flows from that out, and that is dealing with the paperwork, the banking, the estate, dealing with having to walk into a room and seeing a piece of furniture, a piece of clothing, walking down the street and seeing the same tie being worn by somebody that your husband used to wear. Things would trigger out of a smell, like the actual smell of something would trigger it, and it's learning the triggers and having to work your way through them. But I found, and historically I find, in dealing with the counselors who, I talked to a lot of the counselors in regards to PTSD, they say that the paperwork is the overwhelming one because it's something that everyone forgets. Like, everyone wants to support us on, here's some flowers and you feel good. Oh, I'll get rid of that chair so you don't have a memory of that, or I'll take that picture down. But every day the mailman drops off a trigger.
Yeah, that is so true.
Yeah, you've got to deal with the estate. You've got to deal with, okay, here's, what do we do with the cremains? Or what do we do with it's like, I don't ever want to deal with any of this stuff. And which is funny for me, because mine is, it's really interesting because of all the battle scars I get from over my career. I get an allowance from Veterans Affairs. I get a veterans allowance because we fall under the military. Anyway, it's a whole other issue. But so I get an allowance, and they send me paperwork to update things. And you've got, how's this injury doing? Or you've got this, please, update your file. And because it's government paperwork, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So I actually had a friend come over and sit down for about 3 hours going through umpteen different forms one day, because I just, government paperwork triggers me. Because I used to deal with government paperwork for 28 years. And a whole other, my issue with PTSD and my employer and things like that. But in talking to the counselors, they're going, oh yeah, it's the most kind of put off to the side trigger is the paperwork, and it's one of the major triggers that really gets people. So your Milton is an angel incarnate. He is somebody that I got lots of respect for. If he was helping you through that paperwork side, that is a huge issue and a huge trigger. And we can't, we as a survivor, you as a survivor, you can't continue down your own path. You can't move on unless all that corporate crap gets done. The banking and the estate and all that legalese crap, unless that's taken care of, you can't move on.
No, and it is a nasty bit of business. That's fascinating. I had not thought of this before from the paperwork angle, but in fact, throughout the time Milton and I shared a home, I could not go to the mailbox. It was his job to go to the mailbox, sort out what needed to be done, and then we would review the bills. He'd say, "Okay, you got a credit card bill for $372," and I would just say, "Please don't make me look at it. Just make sure there's nothing weird on it, and I'll sign a check and pay it." I know it doesn't make sense to the outside world, but even something like the mailbox freaked me out.
Well, the mailbox is a box of unknown stress, and you won't know the stress until you open it.
Yeah.
So it's easier just not to open the box.
Which I didn't for a long time.
Yeah.
And I mean, he took care of it for a while. And then, it's also interesting, after the medical stuff, I started getting a lot of medical bills. And that became a source of a lot of stress too, because you don't even know, is this legit? Is this not legit? And, but by the way, that little ER that accidentally killed me, the one that, stuffed me like a Christmas goose rather than address the bleeding, they sent me a bill, or corporate did, for $7,900 for my hour there. And then my insurance denied it because they said it was a non-emergent circumstance. And I said, oh, you mean where I bled to death and they had to restart my heart with electricity? That's a non-emergent circumstance. But anyway, ultimately, I did prevail.
Well, do you now own that small? And this is the other thing too. Is when we are suffering from trauma, there is a legal remedy for malpractice by physicians, but a lot of time people don't grab an attorney quick because that's a trigger, having to deal with the hospital again.
I actually made a conscious decision to not sue. My dead husband was a litigator, and he was involved. One of the last lawsuits before he killed himself was a $40 million lawsuit. I know that filing a lawsuit against somebody is akin to declaring war, and I just wanted peace. And I have enough. I have enough for my needs. I just couldn't do it because, there's interrogatories, there's depositions, there's hearings. It is endless. It's just endless.
It is, and it goes on for years too. It's not like, okay, we'll cut you a check tomorrow. It's going to be the next 7 or 8 years of having this over your head. But still, for them to send you a bill, even it's like, okay, you guys screwed up, but yeah, okay, we screwed up, but you want to pay this for us? No.
Well, and there's another PS to this. They called me within days of when I got home. The hospital megaplex that was involved in all this called me, and they said, "Hi, Mrs. Thornton, we're doing a survey based on your recent visit to the ER and, blah, blah. Can you give us a synopsis of your opinion of your stay there?" And I said, "Oh, sure. You mean...
Are you sitting down?" Yeah.
I said, "Other than the fact that you screwed up everything you touched and sent me to my reward and caused my death and I had to be resuscitated with electricity, other than that, everything was just swell." And apparently the kid did hear me, this young man who called for the survey. I had a friend who had a biopsy at that same hospital about 3 months later, and he said, now after they do a biopsy, inpatient, whatever, he said, or outpatient, he said, they make you go sit in a chair for 3 hours and be observed. And he said, "I have a feeling that was you that did that." And I said, "Probably so."
Okay,
yes, that's the hospital's new policy is that.
I want you to focus on that. I want you to take that, just that little bit of that tidbit of information, and then expand it on the thousands of people that now come into that facility, and the possibility of, as a result of your event, how many lives that may save as a result of you crossing over and coming back, having that conversation, or even, did your event start a ripple that in the long run saves other people's lives?
Well, that's a nice thought. I don't know. I don't know how widespread that is. But honestly, I was kind of gratified to hear that they realized how badly they screwed up. when I told that nurse 3 times, something's gone awfully wrong. And she kept saying, honey, when you get home and lie down, you'll feel fine. And I knew she was wrong. But I was not experienced in the ways of hospitals, so I just meekly acquiesced and said, okay, I'll go home. I'll go home and die. But, the other thing is, I think this event needed to happen. I really believe this was something important that had to happen. Because my prayer had been, God, let me die or heal me. And in fact, I got both, which is pretty remarkable.
And again, this is my third person looking at your event. You asked to go and to be healed. You got it. The periphery, what happened to people like the little angelic nurse sitting on the steel stool? How did this change her life? Look what happened to Milton. The blast radius, your blast radius, how did that affect other people? And how did that change the trajectory of their lives? Where were they in their life? It's like one of those old TV shows or an old movie where this is happening, the protagonist, but there's other people, they have, their lives are hectic and going day to day and whatever, and 5 different people kind of coming into interacting with the life of the main person in the film, and something happens to the main person which then explodes out and affects and actually changes the trajectory of the lives in each of the people around it. And there's people in that surgery, in that little core group that you have never seen since or never heard from since, and they may have taken something from that, and it may be just, and I would describe it as the bumpers on a little kid's bowling lane. It's like going along, and all of a sudden, poof, they're off on a different angle now, but you don't know. And it was just that slight little bend in their life, and they needed that to get, we'll call it their path, or to get back to where they're supposed to be going. Milton's the best example. He goes from not believing and not looking at the greater picture to actually researching it now and getting into it and understanding. And it was just that incident that did it.
Yes. And, I guess I should include, he shared this with me after we were back home. His sister, Mabel, who's also very dear to me, had been involved. She was one of the 2 people keeping an eye on me at the hospital. So we're back at my beautiful home in Suffolk, Virginia, and I'm flopped out on the couch, and Milton's sitting in a chair, Mabel's sitting in a chair. And I asked Milton, so, how did this, what I asked him after he told the story of this angel, I said, what did this do to your belief system? And he said, he kind of slinked down in the chair, and he said, it shattered every single thing I have ever believed. Mm-hmm. And then his sister became a little emotional, and she said, brother, I've been praying for you for 30 years that you would learn about the love of God.
Yeah, you all kind of came together in one point in time in history, and that glitch was you. Things changed from there. Yeah.
It's a pretty profound experience.
Yeah. I'm always fascinated going, wow, what would it be like to die and then come back? And then I kept thinking, nah, I'll just wait till the end and I'm good now. It's interesting. I've always believed, because I have a lot of friends who are quote unquote psychics. And I'm a bit intuitive myself. But I've been called a psychic by my friends, but I just never use that word on myself. But I believe in, people say, well, do you believe in God? And that gets stuck in my throat just from my many, many years of my upbringing. Or do I believe in God? Well, hold on. I talk to the archangels. I use Archangel Michael to clear things out of my room when I don't want them there. I use Archangel for protection. I see, I see things. So if I buy into one angel, I've got to go through all the other ones too. I've then got to believe in everything that comes from that. And all my psychic friends they say, well, of course, God, we believe in God. We may call him the creator. We may call it the universe. It's all the same being. And the angels come down from there, Jesus as an ascended master, and like okay, I'm buying, I'm getting in, I'm catching up to you guys now. But it's still the term God, I think I was afraid of actually saying the word, and I think that comes as a result of all those bizarre ministries you guys have down in the U.S. where somebody goes off and starts fooling around with somebody else's wife, and then they get caught with a prostitute or whatever, and they're running these ministries and they're thinking, okay, you guys just, it's all a big scam. And so they kind of screwed it from my upbringing, thinking that organized religion was somehow a big to-do, and nobody was really that religious because they were all off, banging each other's wives or whatever, and then they were getting caught and they wanted to pray and get forgiveness and please send money. So I got really away from that organized religion thing, and it's kind of just come back as more of a spiritual side of of Christianity, I guess and a mix of various beliefs. But yeah, God's there, and whoever he or she is paying attention.
Yes.
To every one of us.
That quote I heard in the beginning was when I said, "And who are you?" And the answer was, "You are the image and likeness. I'm the original." That there's not a day of my life goes by now that I don't think about that. And the angels did tell me, this is some helpful information. They told me, because I was miffed. I'm still a little miffed about coming back. I mean, especially, you have a bad day or you're not feeling well or somebody cuts you off in traffic. I think, what the heck, man? What am I doing here? I was supposed to be over there, not here. But the angels told me shortly after I came back, because I was pretty miffed, actually thoroughly. And they said, you got 20 years left, use them wisely. And I thought, well, okay, that's good to know. So I'm down to 18, but it does make financial planning a lot easier.
Now, are you going to rack up your credit card right at the... No, I'm kidding.
No, I actually live very simply these days.
A friend of mine, Marianne Morgan, who was psychic for like Nancy Reagan and Frank Sinatra and things like that, she's died a number of times. Every time, and she knows when she's going to die next. In fact, you can ask her, but don't. So when am I going to die, and how, and where? And she'll give you the time and the date and the location and how. So don't do that. But she said, wouldn't you like to know? It'd be better for like financial planning. And I said, no, I don't want to know. I'm just going to let that go. It's just kind of funny. She always knows when she's going to die next. She'll be riding her horse, and the horse will start. The last time she died, anyway, the horse started getting skittish, and she went, "Well, I remember this. I'm going to die again." Sure enough, she died, but she's better. I think she's on her 5th or 6th death.
Good heavens.
But every time she comes back, she's like, sees more things. She's got more information. It's fascinating, those psychics who die and come back. And when I say die, I don't mean like, well, there's some die in car accidents or injuries, but it's usually on the operating table or on the way to the hospital in the back of the ambulance as a result of a bang on the head or something. But literally they're flatline and they're out for 3 or 4 minutes. But again, they perceive it's like hours.
Yeah.
Because they're traveling to different locations and talking to angels and loved ones and about what's going on, and then zapping back into their body. Really kind of pissed too.
Yeah.
Because it's such a good place. I understand, but I'm not going there yet. One of the things, what have you learned in this entire path that you've been on about dealing with suicide and as I said, more importantly, the healing from suicide? Well,
I guess one of the big things I've learned is that one of the things the angels told me, and this is true. I mean, I'm a writer, got a little splash of autism, maybe a little too much intellect going on. I don't know. But I had been ruminating on how could he do this? Why did he do this? I thought he loved me. And there's actually a Bible verse, Deuteronomy 2:3, I think, where it talks about, ye have circled the mountain long enough, time to stop and go north. the biggest healing for me, and of course I'm very grateful to not be dealing with a disease process. That's wonderful to be free of that. But the real healing was the healing of my soul. And what the angels told me was that what he did and all the et ceteras therein had been encapsulated. And it was a thing, it was there, but it couldn't hurt me anymore. It couldn't cause these endless ruminations, this endless obsession almost, that he had done this, but I had been set free. And, in so many ways, and for those lost in trauma, I don't say this flippantly because I've been there, but it was almost like this experience of dying and talking to the angels and coming back from heaven was almost like a merciful father shaking a child awake from a terrible, terrible nightmare and saying, wake up, it's over. It's not going to hurt you anymore. You're with me. And that, I wish I could give that to other people, because one of the things about being in this group, as you described, a family, which is a lovely word, of suicide widows, is you hear all their stories and you realize why when somebody loses their mind on aisle 5 of Target, and the old Rosemary would say, what the heck is wrong with them? They need to do this or that or this. Now I think about my friend whose husband hung himself with a sheet from their linen closet, and now she can't go down a linen aisle without crying, because you talk about a trigger. Holy cow. So now I see it in a very different context. And when I see people losing their minds, I think something's very bad has happened to them. This is not how people behave. And I just feel sad. I feel sad for them. I feel sorry for them. I try to pray for them. But I don't know how to tell somebody lost in the throes of trauma that there is a way out. And for me, the way out was leaning on God, trusting God. And you were talking earlier about the Archangel Michael. You can't have warriors without a commander in chief. There's somebody organizing this. There's somebody putting this together. And I guess I don't know what advice I would give, except if you don't have a belief system, I don't know what you can tether yourself to when the storms come. I don't know how you do that without having faith in something bigger, a bigger plan, a bigger being, a recourse, a help, a loving father. I don't know how you get out of this unless you have faith. There's something bigger going on.
Oh, yeah. It's, in my experience in suicides, you touched on it right at the beginning about when you decided you wanted to leave, you got real kind of peaceful and comfortable.
Yes.
That's overly common. That's almost 100%. When you have somebody coming into work every day and they're really agitated and they're, I'm going to kill myself, and they're all agitated every day coming in, and all of a sudden one day they come in and they are just love and light and peaceful and wanting to hug everyone and buying them lunch. And you're thinking, in hindsight, we go back and go, oh yeah, that was when he decided to.
Right.
When
yes.
you actually, it's very peaceful because there's an out.
Yes.
The trick is, if you can identify it then and point it out to them that this is why they're peaceful, there are many outs. That just happens to be the extreme one. And you say, you can continue to feel the way you're feeling now. Like, let's release what other things were keeping you here and triggering you and all this. But the hanging one is the example I used when I used to do my talks as a policeman to other police about the mindset of someone who kills himself. Because I went to a suicide where a fellow had hung himself. He was in a stockbroker and lost everything kind of scenario, and he went downstairs and hung himself in the basement, and he hung himself right beside where his 8-year-old son would come downstairs in the morning, put his shoes on and his coat before going to school. So looking at it, you think, what a horrible thing to do to the 8-year-old son, because the 8-year-old would be the first person to find dad dead. Well, Dad's not thinking that at the time. Dad is not thinking about the son. He's not thinking about the family. He's not, his brain is going in a whirlwind, a complete tornado. And there's no what happens next. There's no, if I do this, what's going to happen next. Some people will do that and actually plan the whole thing out. I've been to one where, well, we talked him out of killing himself, but he left his suit out, the one he wanted to be buried in. And had a note and had everything all put down properly. Like, this person has to do this, and this person's going to do this, and like a well-planned escape plan. But this guy was disorganized. You know, we talk about organized and disorganized murders, but this is a suicide, and this one was completely disorganized because his brain, he wasn't functioning mentally, and just that's the out. He didn't care about what we'll call the mess afterwards. Yeah. And who would find it, because he's not thinking in this case, and he and she's are not thinking of what happens after. They're only thinking about that split second, that second that's in their head. And so I was teaching, like, as a new policeman, you don't walk in and try not to criticize too much about the person's mentality, because they weren't themselves at the point that happened. You know, the organized ones are a little bit, usually those ones are medical based, like, you know, they're dying of cancer, they're, you know, whatever, there's something is about to happen, they're about to go to prison for the rest of their life, or they're a thing where there's a complete life change they have no control over and they don't want to do it. And then that's a more of an organized suicide, but the disorganized ones are horrible when you walk into them as a family member, and then you know, as a third party walking in, you just try to take a deep breath and a step back and deal with what you find, and without criticism, really, and move on. Anyway, I just rambled there. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. If I could wave a magic wand, if I could change something, one of my dreams is if my story does well, because I do live a very simple life. I mean, it's funny. I haven't missed any of the stuff I sold. I like having very few possessions. It really pleases me. But if I could wave a magic wand, I would want to start an organization for suicide widows and widowers, or perhaps even extend to anyone who's lost someone. But the unique thing about a suicide widow/widower is we're often questioned by the police. So our husbands' brains are in a puddle, and the cops pull us aside and say, "What was the nature of this last argument you had with him? When was the last time you were here?" We used to treat rape victims brutally in terms of law enforcement 50 years ago. And now we have an awareness that it doesn't matter how short her skirt was or that she had on those sexy high heels. We have got to get to a place like that for suicide widows, where when they have just experienced the worst trauma they'll probably ever know, that they then become the lead suspect in a murder investigation. And then society, that was the worst for me, was society treated me like a leper. People thought it was spreading. And when we had the closed casket visitation for my dead husband, and you see all these happily married couples waddle past your husband's closed casket, squeezing each other a little tighter as they stroll past the casket. And then when they get up to you, they say, "If anything happened to Robbie, I'd just lay down and die." And I want to say, "Oh, F you very much. And by the way, I guess I didn't love him enough if I haven't died already." People say the most outlandish things. If you could lay down and die because your husband did this, I'd be dead 20,000 times over. But we're biologically hardwired to survive for reasons I don't completely understand. But yeah, society treats us very, very badly. Suicide truly is a death like no other. And we have got to find a way in our so-called 21st century enlightened society to deal with these people who are the victims of suicide. And I don't like casting myself as a victim, but we get treated very, very badly from society, by law enforcement. People don't know what to do with us, and they are literally afraid that this may be catching. So that if I could do anything, I'd create an organization that when a suicide widow is first, when this happens, she has an advocate. maybe an advocate in the legal system, maybe an advocate in law enforcement who sits down and says, okay, she's in shock. We're going to wait to question her until after you do your preliminary investigation. Or just to have somebody there and say, you don't have to answer that question. There's got to be a way to create an advocacy system for somebody who's just seen their husband in these conditions.
Yeah, we have a group that works with us. They're volunteers called Victim Services. And when I go to a suicide and it's a family member, Victim Services are offered, because Victim Services can deal with the triggers. They can deal with the paperwork, and they can help, deal with, literally, let's get down to it. You can deal with body removal. Who's going to clean it up?
Yeah, who's going to clean it up? In America, you clean up the stuff, which is unconscionable.
What? Seriously?
Oh, hell yes.
We actually my neighbors, actually, that's what they used to do. It was a young couple, and they would, that was their job. You'd call them up and they'd come in and clean everything up.
Yeah, not here. You're on your own. You got to hire a biohazard company to come in and, wipe the brains off the wall. And I guess I shouldn't be that graphic. The other thing that happened is about, I don't know, again, paperwork. 5-6 weeks out, the police call me and they say, we're ready to release the personal property from the investigation. Do you want the gun back? And I'm like, are you effing kidding me? Do I want the gun back? But anyway, I did get his wedding ring and his cell phone and his, something else, keys back. And I knew I was in trouble when they handed it to me in a biohazard bag. And let's just say Milton got handed that one and told to clean it up, because that was covered in, let's just say, the remnants of his last moments.
Yeah, and that's, oh man, it's like there's a number of rules like in policing here that they're a little bit different where you live because you have different jurisdictions and things. But like, we're not even allowed to phone up somebody and tell them that their loved one is dead. You have to go there in person.
I think that's much better. Much better. And
if you're in a small town, you have to take get a hold of their friend, neighbor, find out if they go to church, grab their pastor or their minister or their rabbi, whatever, see if they'll come with us, what kind of support. We'll have Victim Services come, because I do the NOK. It's the worst. If people say, oh, it's the worst job you've ever had as a policeman, I said, it's NOK, notification of next of kin.
Oh, wow.
And I'll tell you, here's one that I did once. There was a fellow who had worked on an oil seismic crew up in the Northwest Territories, and he was up there and he'd have a few drinks the night before work, and he got into a truck and drove off, and the next day they didn't find him. They didn't know where he went, and they found the truck completely burnt out, and there were human remains on the back seat. Oh, so you're thinking it's him, but you can't prove it without his dental records. So I had to go, 1,000 miles south of there. I had to go to this small town where I worked in and go to his mother and ask her for the name of his dentist so we could get maybe his last x-ray, so we could send, so it's not really, it's not like, hey, your son's dead. It's, your son could be dead. So I got lucky with this lady. She's an elderly lady, lived in a trailer park that was kind of run by her church group. And it's beautiful homes, little hills and stuff. It was a great place to live. And I got there, and I was pretty new at the job. Probably had about 5 years on the job. Not even that many. 2.5 years at the job. And hated doing notifications of next of kin. And I knocked on the door, and she looked at me, and I was nervous. And she said, "Oh dear, come in, have a tea." And she sat me down and she said, "Are you okay?" And she went through trying to calm me down. And the pastor eventually came over and we sat there, and I said, "Look, this is what I've got. And do you have any family around?" She goes, "Oh, my husband's dead, and my other son, I have 2 sons, and one was killed in a car accident." And so I was like, "Oh, crap." So here I go. I said, "This is what I have." And I told her, obviously you tell her the truth, we get it out quick. This is what we found. And she said, "Oh, I see. Well, let me look for the dentist." And she gives me the dentist information, and she now fills up my tea again because she wants me to talk and hang her out because she was worried about me. And I was like, oh, "Good Lord!"
Oh, wow.
And in hindsight, I'm thinking, yeah, she walked me through that one. But unfortunately, it was her son that died. He had got high centered on a stump off road and left the engine running because it was a bit chilly, and he hopped in the back seat to sleep. And then the engine caught fire, and then the smoke went through, and he died of smoke inhalation, and then eventually the whole thing burned. But I go, oh my gosh, I hate those. I've actually knocked on a lady's door to tell her her garbage cans had, a bear had knocked them over the back. It sounds like I live out in the forest, but I don't. But anyway, a bear got through and knocked a bunch of stuff out back, and I knocked on the front door of this lovely older woman's home, and she opened the wooden door and looked at me through the screen door and screamed and slammed the door. Because probably every time a policeman ever knocked on her door, he was telling her that somebody had died.
Oh, man.
So I was like, okay, I understand. And I'll just she'll know that I fixed all her garbage cans for her. Everything's okay. But,
oh, golly.
But she must have been in her late 80s. She just, a little thing, opened the door, looked at me, and her eyes just got big, and she screamed and slammed the door. Oh, nobody can die if I tell the policeman to leave. It's like,
yeah.
Anyway, again, I rambled. You've obviously learned a lot about dealing with suicide through your group and your own experiences. You talk about this group. How would somebody get a hold of them? Is there do they have a website?
Well, I'm actually a member of, I tried a few in-person groups, like suicide support groups. And of course, this was before COVID, but I tried a few of those groups, and boy, they were not my thing. I know at one of the groups, a woman said, everyone gets a turn to talk. This woman in her 60s or 70s, she said, my son would still be alive if he hadn't married that woman. And that's the thing. The wife gets the blame. If the husband kills himself, the wife gets blamed. And 2 years after my husband's death, 2 years, I got a text from one of our quote friends that said, do you think he killed himself because you were cheating on him? How do you answer that? It's like, have you stopped beating your wife yet? I did not cheat on my husband. We were not estranged. I thought we had a solid marriage. But my point is, there's got to be a reason. He did this for a reason. Not necessarily, and if there was a reason, it has nothing to do with his wife or his kids or his mother-in-law. I mean, it's grasping at straws to say, well, my friend wouldn't have done this without a reason. So the in-person groups I did not have a good time with. I found a group on Facebook of suicide widows, and those women, and by the way, aging in age from probably 20-something to 80-something, they saved my life. Because when I'd go on and I'd say, I haven't read a book in 3 years, it's just words jumbled together, 12 people would comment and say, me too. I thought I was the only one. When I would say, a member of my own family just blamed me for my husband's death, it broke my heart. A dozen women would come back again. Oh yeah. It's not just his family that disowns you. It's your own family that sometimes a member of your own family will do that. So finding out that all this was absolutely typical was an enormous relief, just enormous. So it's on Facebook, and there's a number of suicides, we're known as suicide survivors, which I know seems like a curious nomenclature, but if you go into Facebook and look for a group like that, they saved me. They literally saved me. So somebody who's struggling with this, I would say that for me, that was the great blessing. In the suicide support groups, it's hard for me, certainly. It was hard to find people who lost their spouses. It was overwhelmingly people who'd had a child lost to suicide. Not so many folks there dealing with a spouse. And then I did go to one group. This didn't end well for me. I went to one group in the Midwest here where I'm living, and it was Suicide Awareness Day or something. And I walked in, and the facilitator stops me at the front, and she said, we're lighting a candle for all of our loved ones that have gone. What was your loved one's name? we'd like to light a candle for him. And I said, that son of a bitch doesn't deserve a candle. I don't want a stinking candle. And she said, ma'am, are you sure? I said, hell yes, I'm sure that son of a bitch does not deserve a candle. Do you want me to say it louder for the crowd? And anyway, like I said, that didn't really go well for me.
How dare you be honest?
Yeah, I know. But yeah, I mean, his last words blaming me, and there was some other stuff going on. I found out after his death he'd had affairs, blah, blah, blah. It's okay to be angry. I guess that's my number one advice. Everyone says, you can't heal until you forgive. What? No, I think it's okay to heal even if you feel some anger. Anger is a very normal human emotion. I don't think you can let it consume you, but right. I think it's perfectly normal to feel anger. Anger
is, I find that it, in hindsight, is just an over manifestation of frustration.
Yes.
I get frustrated with this, then anger. I've been really good at not being angry. I was gifted, this is kind of weird, gifted a meditation about almost 4 years ago now. I was just doing some breathing exercises, just kind of calming down and relaxing before bed. And all of a sudden, I got this thing in my head that I had to go back as far as I could in my life to where I could remember being bullied or picked on or whatever, and add 3 words to it. I forgive you.
Huh. And
then the trick was, do not dwell on the incident or the power of the words. It was, and I describe it as sticking, like working at the Chiquita banana factory, putting the stickers on the bunches as I go by. That's how quick. So I went back as far as I could. And I did this for 6 or 7 nights before bed. I just laying in bed, going back. And some days I'd remember an incident, I'd add it. And so obviously there's days that I forgot an incident, but I would just like, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you, I forgive you. And about the 6th or 7th night, whatever it was, I went all the way back to the first one and said, remember the incident, and said, don't care. I'm no longer, it was like I gave everything back to all those individual people. And the byproduct of that is I cannot lose my temper. I can be frustrated, but I couldn't get mad at somebody. Somebody cuts you off in traffic, I kind of giggle. I can't do it because I think, and this is another way to describe it, is all the times I was bullied, picked on, somebody did something terrible to me growing up or any time in my life, it was like that was the energy that I drew upon to be angry. It was like every time somebody picked on me, I put an arrow in my quiver to be used against someone else. Well, my quiver was empty because everything had gone back. So I swear to God, I was like 3 inches taller the next day. I was walking around just kind of floating, going, "This is really weird." And I've told other people who've done it, and I always say I was gifted it. It just totally came to me. The entire thing just went inside of me, and I started doing it. And then I will do it every so often, again, just to update all silly things that have happened in life. But the forgiveness thing, and one of my good friends, Denise, I told her that because she carries a lot of stuff. And she says, well, I can't. I can do everything but one, because she had found her mother after her mother was murdered. And she had come across her. And she sat through the trial of the murderer and everything. And when he was convicted, he just turned and smiled at her. And she cannot get her head around that, to forgive that person. Yeah. Which, that's totally makes sense. There's no way you're going to ever get that out of your human head, seeing the fellow who killed your mother and you found her body. Just looking at him smiling at you on the date that he was convicted. That is a hill that she's not going to be able to climb in this life. Yeah. And I respect that. But, use it on all the other ones when the guy cuts you off in traffic. But the 3 words, all religions have forgiveness in them. And it's not dwelling on the incident or the power of the words. It's literally a sticker. I forgive you, move on. I forgive you, move on. And I'm not saying that it'll work for you, because you are you and you will know these things. But it's just one of those, just one of those things that worked for me.
Well, that is a powerful story. When I first came back from my heavenly encounter, I was forgiving everybody for everything very quickly, and it kind of fades. And I've heard that's not uncommon. And one of the great talk about frustrations. One of the frustrations is I don't want it to fade. I want to be the person that I was a week after I came back from heaven. But I did talk with some spiritual people that I trust implicitly, and they said it'd be hard to function in society if you spend all your time walking around talking to angels and hearing them sing. That we're here to be a blessing to others, not just to listen to the angelic music 24/7. So, but yeah, I want to stay in that holy, uplifted, elevated place. And boy, this is a hard place to do that. It really is.
Oh yeah, it is, because we are interacting with humans.
Yes, and some are nicer than others.
And that's, I think, and it comes down to taking that step back and looking at why are we here? Why are we? It's not. It's more the royal we than the group we. Why are we, the individual, here at this point in our life at this time interacting with these people? Yeah. Are we giving, or are we giving the other people something to take away on their path, or are we taking something from them on our path, or is it a mutual give and take as we bump into each other, as we're deflecting off the bumpers on the bowling lane heading down to the end of this existence in this life? Who knows? I know we'll know once we die. But let's not do that yet.
Sometimes not even then.
Yes. Yeah, you don't get all the answers. Come on.
Yeah.
We'll give you all the answers, but then you're not going back.
I actually think that's how it works.
Yeah, I interviewed a fellow named Jim Mars a couple of years ago. Jim wrote the book JFK that the movie was based on, and he has a big conspiracy theory about John F. Kennedy's assassination. He was a reporter down in Dallas. I think he was what you'd call a cub reporter or whatever back in the day when that happened. Yeah. And he was all into conspiracies and UFOs and things. And when I heard that he passed, I think 2 years ago, of a heart attack, I thought, oh, that's sad. And then I kind of smiled and I thought, okay, now he knows. He's got all those answers he was looking for finally, but he just can't tell us. So, yeah, we'll get this figured out. We just won't figure it out while continuing to wear this meat sack that we've been provided.
Yep, I believe that's true. I really do. And then I think kind of the twist of it all is by the time we get there and we get it all sorted out, we see that in the big picture, it wasn't really that big a deal.
Yeah, in the great scheme of things, I think this could be just my opinion. I think we get to the end and we go off and do our thing, and we go up to heaven. We go to where we're going, and you kind of sit down and they look at you and say, "So what did you learn?" Well, I learned this and this and this. Okay, And if you had to do it all over again, what would you do? Well, I probably wouldn't do that. And I say, yeah, okay, fine. Okay, move on. Would you like to go back? Well, maybe not.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like, I'd like to go back. No, Matt, could I hang out here a little bit longer? Yeah, I just got a new kid. I'd like to see her grow up. Well, yeah, okay, fine. And now you've got your own near-death experience. But yeah, it's funny. I've just talked to a lot of people with near-death experiences, and there's a difference in their experience, the things that they see, the perceptions of God and Jesus, or light and heaven and darkness and tunnels and orbs and things. But it all comes down to the feeling as opposed to the visual. The feelings are all the same, but the visuals can be different.
That's very interesting. I never thought of it in that context. But yeah, we all have different experiences, but we all talk about peace, joy, and love. Mm-hmm.
And just, well, the woo-woo way of saying it is like love and light. It's just pure love and light, and it's overwhelming. Yeah, fascinating. And if you guys want to chat a little bit more with Rosemary Thornton, that's who she is on. If you are on the Facebook, Rosemary Thornton, look her up. There's a picture of her and a dog.
No, that's Teddy the dog.
Teddy is running in a grassy field behind her on her Facebook page. So go if you have a question for her, or you can also go to the website, which is searshomes.org. All one word, searshomes.org. Like Sears, like Simpson Sears, for us who are over a certain age. Yeah, Sears, or Sears Roebuck if you're really, really old. But yeah, Sears Homes, because that's what Rosemary used to do. She is a wonderful you're a wonderful people. You're a wonderful person who, for about multiple years,
20 years.
Yeah, wrote books about the houses that Sears built. Yeah, it's fascinating, that kind of cool thing about those old houses. Hey, as an empathic kind of person, before all this, I'm going to throw you under the bus here. Have you ever seen a ghost?
Yes, I believe I have.
The shadows in your room when you were little?
I have had... when people pass, they come to say goodbye to me. So yeah, it's mainly family members on their way out, stop in to say bye. I mean, it happens so much that when it happens, I just make notes. Because one of the fascinating things that happened to me during this NDE, or I prefer to call it my temporary death experience, I wasn't near death. I had a memory return to me while I'm floating in the blackness. I had this memory come to me that I had been here before in this time. In this framework of memory. And the angels told me, they said, you remember the story your mom told you about you were given up for dead as an infant? It turns out you weren't almost dead. We sent you back then too. And I was like, wow, that explains so much about my life, that I was always the weirdo, the oddball, the one who could see the angels. And so that actually... it was so funny. Earlier we talked about that when you die and come back, sometimes people call it, people who've had multiple NDEs call it an upgrade on their psychic abilities.
Yeah.
I get that. I do get that, because that experience realizing that I had been in that place before and had come back, answered a lot of questions I had had for 59 years. So throughout my life, it has become such a thing that people come to say goodbye before they leave that I keep a ledger of, okay, somebody came at 11:13 on Wednesday. I'm pretty sure it was Aunt Sally. I heard her voice, and then I get a call an hour or a day later that, well, Aunt Sally passed. And I look at the time, and it's always right. So yes, that has been a lifelong experience for me.
Mm-hmm. So you've had two death experiences.
One is an infant. Yeah. And I just recently, after coming back from this, I started reading up on the near-death experiences of tiny children, and it is a life-changing thing. And feeling an oddball is a very, very common experience.
Very common, yeah. I've talked to some people with near-death experiences, or like I like to call them death experience, like you do. Because you do die. It's not like you're nearly dead. You were dead. Death experiences are survivors of a death experience, we'll call it. This opinion, like the first one, we'll call it the first one, where all of a sudden they have a belief system change, or they start seeing things they didn't see before, or hearing things they didn't hear before. It's almost like on the other side, they said, okay, she knows we're here. We don't have to put that filter on anymore. It's like, why we have to keep this filter on? She already's been here. She's seen the room. She's seen the chair. She's seen she's walked the tunnel. She knows it's here. She's good. And she's
that's back. A great way of looking at it.
Yeah, they don't have to work so hard on trying to hide behind things anymore. They'll just come right out. One of the other questions I have for you, do you still wake up between 3 and 4:30 in the morning?
Not so much, actually, which I consider a mercy. I used to have very troubled sleep, and now my sleep is much more peaceful.
Nice. That's good then. And the other one, finally, is you're dreaming while you're dreaming?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know. I think I have maybe a little more awareness of that. Yeah, but I don't know. The nightmares I used to have seemed so realistic. It was a torture to have that nightmare again and again about him.
Could you wake yourself? If you saw that nightmare coming, could you wake yourself up before?
No, no, it seemed so real. Yeah, it just seemed so real. And that was one of the reasons it was such a blessing to have my buddy Milton in the same house, because I would scream. And that was part of his gig for 2.5 years, was when he heard me screaming, he would jump up out of bed, run into my room, and shake me awake. Those nightmares were I'm not being silly, but they were tempting me to kill myself, because if you can't get peace and sleep, you're in trouble.
Yeah. And that's the hard one. My father, I think he was like 18 years old to 24 years old, 22 during the Second World War. And he was a gunner in a light bomber, flew over France and used to bomb the Germans over there. And his friend, another young kid, was in a bomber beside his, and my dad was looking out his little turret on the plane and watched his friend's plane get hit by flak, catch fire, burn, and just fall into France. And after the war, he came home and lived with my grandparents, and he would wake the family up screaming, "We're on fire, get out, get out, get out." And he's doing this crawl with a Winchester rifle through the house on his belly. And my grandmother had to come and sit on him, wake him up, and pull the rifle away. And they had to sell the rifle to get it out of the house. But my dad went through all those PTSD nightmares too, back before it was called PTSD, and back before he could do anything. Luckily, he didn't. He never drank or anything like that. He was with his parents. So after the Second World War, he moved home and lived with his parents until he met my mother, and then moved in with her. So he had a family support system to get him through that.
That is wonderful.
Yeah, the nightmares, when they described them, it was him, and it was all based on watching his friend. Again, we have these feelings, we have these effects on in our memories that we had absolutely no control over. He had no control over the plane beside him blowing up. And that was his best friend, and he was gone. Yeah. And there was nothing he can do. When we have that happen, we had no control over that outcome. It's the loss of control. Well, stress. Loss of control of a situation, or the perceived loss of control. That is what stress is. And when it's that extreme to where it's a loved one's death, and you are a sensitive, empathic person, that's going to manifest in PTSD. It's horrid. It's a horrible thing, but the more you understand it, the easier it is to deal with.
And that's the reason this whole thing was such a blessing. I still struggle with loud noises. I still cry easily. There's still issues I deal with, but I'm able to be a functioning member of society again. And prior to this, I was not. I'm able to go to the mailbox. I'm able to, to function in life. And so that's the big difference. And I tell people, and I mentioned this a moment ago, but the real healing, in fact, after I came out of the hospital and I was back home, I flipped open my Bible. It fell open to Psalm 23. And it looked like the words, "He restoreth my soul," were in highlighted colors. And it made me weep, because I realized that is the real healing. Medicine can dress us up, fix this, patch this, take this out. But having your soul restored, that's something only God can do.
Yep. Well said. People don't realize that, and especially in the woo-woo community, a lot of the people I talk to and my friends who read tarot cards and oracle cards and things, and they'll come out and they'll say, I wonder what my day is going to be like, and they'll flip a card and get some information. And I pointed out to my friend one day, I said, you can do that with, there's books you can do that with. And she said, what do you mean, a book? And I said, what's your belief system? You can do that with a Bible. You can do that with the Torah. You can do that. Just open a page. And it's as random as flipping a card. And look at the page. And well, I'm not really a Christian or Catholic or anything. I said, it's just information. And all you're doing is you're asking for information, and try it a couple of times. Like, you know, and literally whatever your belief system is. And honestly, you could probably do it with a dictionary.
That's a good point.
If the Beyond wants to send you a word of the day, what a great book to have words. So,
and that is something I see differently. There's signs everywhere. I see signs in the funny little things of life and the billboards that catch my eye. I do feel very much like the angels are still with me, still talking to me. They've had to fade into the background a bit, but yes, I do feel like, I frankly feel like I'm divinely guided, and it's so much different. Before this, boy, I had mission statements and long range goals and short range goals, and now I think, I'd like to go to Idaho. I'm going to go buy a ticket and go now. So it's a very different way to live a life. It really is.
Well, the difference with what you are, or where you are in your life, is that you said you believe you are divinely guided. We are all divinely guided. It's just that you know it. And you've said, yeah, I am. Therefore, okay, I'm going to pay attention. You're familiar with angel codes?
I am not.
Seeing, waking up in the middle of the night, and why do I wake up at 3:33 every morning, or 5:55? Or I've been seeing these license plates with 222 on them all the time. Those are angel codes. Huh. And if you get a repetition of a number like that, Google angel code 222 555 444, and you get a little angelic reading. So those are little ways with the an angel lightly tapping you on the head.
Oh, that sounds fun. I'd never heard of that before.
Yeah, so just, and now that I've said it, it's like saying, okay, we're going to be looking for Volkswagens on this drive to Harrisburg today. Then you'll see Volkswagens everywhere. Huh. So pay attention that now that I've said, look for numbers that like 222, 222. You may see 222 in the next 10 minutes, and then you'll see a 444 and a 55. You look for the repetition of the three numbers, like seeing 222 7 times a day, as opposed to seeing it twice.
Yeah.
That would be a kind of a hit on the head with a angelic flower. But it doesn't mean we're going to see them all the time. It's only when they're trying to pass information on. But the other thing is, you're connected a little bit higher than most people. You may just get the message. You may just get them standing at the foot of your bed, kicking it, saying, it's time to buy a lottery ticket, or don't buy lottery tickets, you're not going to win.
No, I have had more than once been awakened with a very obscure Bible verse, and they don't read it to me. They just say, like one the other day was, what was it? Isaiah 35. So I thought, I don't even know what that one is. And I look up Isaiah 35, and it's an absolutely beautiful message. I know one that came the other day out of the blue. Gosh, I think it's Psalm 65, maybe Psalm 64, but it says, thy husband will be, thy maker will be thy husband. And I thought, wow, I was just praying about feeling lonely. And then I hear this Bible verse whispered in my ear, and there's my answer. Thy maker is thy husband. So yeah, I do have that experience quite a bit. And sometimes I do hear them talking, but I want to hear them all the time. I don't want it to, kind of come and go. I want to hear them all the time. So
that was really interesting and quite powerful what you just said. Thy maker is, or my maker is thy husband?
Right. And I think it's Psalm 65. Let's see. I'm not sure which psalm it is.
Could that very well be...
I just found it. It's 54:5-6, I think.
So could that very well be, as a result of what your husband did, is who you are today?
Right. Yes, I agree.
Who you are today is a much higher vibration person living a life and moving on to the ability to teach with show other people something that's needed at this time. And again,
I hope so.
Referring to your book that hopefully will be coming out Before COVID kills us all. No, yeah.
Before Christmas. Yeah, actually, we should
Before
talk about
Christmas,
that briefly. The title, which the angels gave to me, was Remembering the Light, How Dying Saved My Life.
Remembering the Light, How Dying Saved My Life. That is very cool.
Isn't that a great title?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because dying did save my life. It really did. I have no doubt. I was relying on nothing but human willpower to not end my life, even 2.5 years out. And frankly, I was running out of road. I really was. I was losing the ability to fight off the devilish whispers.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny how they and when they step in, they being angels, they being the other side, will step in. And I don't mean funny, haha. I mean, it's just interesting how, in talking to people who've had experiences with angelic beings, whether they die or not, where they are in their lives and how that, again, bumper on the little kid's bowling lane sends them off on a different trajectory into another path, or onto the path maybe that they were supposed to be on at the beginning. I always say negative things, and again, we get these discussions. Well, if there's a God, why would a 1-year-old die of cancer? Right. Or that kind of thing. And I've really kind of, I freak a lot of people out over this, but I investigated at one point a serial killer who was the largest serial killer in Canada here. And as a result of the number of women that he had murdered horrifically, a national inquiry was launched into murdered and missing women, Aboriginal women in Canada. And what fell from that inquiry changed the way things were investigated and researched, and mental health was provided to various socioeconomic groups and support and things. So how many people would have had to die before an actual national inquiry was done? Was it like 5 people, 6 people, 7 people? No, it was this much. So my belief system kicks in saying, well, those women came into this life knowing that this is where they were going to they were going to give their lives at this time for the safety and greater good of hundreds of thousands of people to come after, because their sacrifice changed laws nationally. And I also talked about it in the COVID deaths, when people started dying of COVID, which actually resulted in the planet shutting down. And,
yeah, it did.
And when the planet shut down, we talk about here in where I live, we had 2 different bird species that haven't been in this area for 100 years come back because they'd always bypassed this area because of the pollution. But they were coming back now, and animals were moving back into, they're like lower down, closer to where we live. Well, look what happened in Venice. The canals cleared up where you could see down to the bottom, and dolphins were coming back, or porpoise were coming back into them. That hasn't happened in, almost a century. But within a 90-day period, the earth itself cleaned and cleansed to a point that hasn't been, like I was telling people, get outside and go for a walk. The air hasn't been this fresh for 100 years. So how many people had to die before the switch is gone? So did they come into this lifetime and say, okay, I will do this in my life, in your Akashic records or whatever those are. This is what I'm going to do. Oh, and I volunteer to check out when I'm 75 in a nursing home in Italy. And X amount of people had to cross over for that switch to get hit. And that switch getting hit reminds us that, yeah, we do have an impact as human beings on this planet. So let's try not to have to flip that switch again, guys. You've been given an example that you do have an effect. Now what you do with that information is up to you. Off you go. So I look at somebody's death as the drop in a puddle and the ripple going out, and that death affects people negatively and positively on and on and on and on and on. So a young couple with a baby that has passed is a horrible, horrible thing. But what is the purpose? Universal. It's the universe. What is God's purpose of that child coming in and then leaving so quickly? What has it done psychologically to the people involved, all the people involved, the family, the core family, the extended family, the friends? Has it changed their trajectory in their paths? I'd like to say it has, because that way it gives me a belief that God doesn't just take children or take anybody haphazardly. But that's me. That's my belief system in talking to a bunch of people like you and getting little bits and pieces of info.
The where place it goes off the rails for me is having been involved in, I can't think of any better way to say this than a community of people in severe trauma, because I have met so many people in so many various stages of dealing with trauma. The old hackneyed BS, God doesn't give us more than we can handle. Not true. I have seen people shattered and broken by trauma. And in some cases, it takes 10 years to come back. In some cases, 20 years. In some cases, they never come back from it. So I do hear what you're saying. And on a spiritual level, I think there's much merit in it. I do. Because once we get over to the other side, once we die and leave this place, it really is like waking up from a dream. I cannot emphasize that enough. Boy, is that the fact. But for the people mired in it, where it feels like their whole world, it's, I don't know. I guess I'm saying we need to tread gently, because it is, some of this stuff crushes the light out of people's soul. I met a man, I just haphazardly encountered somebody, and we ended up talking for a minute. And I looked in his eyes and I said, "You've had severe trauma, and it wasn't that long ago. What's going on?" And he said, "Well, my son was murdered 6 months ago." And my point is, I can look in somebody's eyes and see it. And that's not a new gift. That's something I've had for a while. But trauma like this, like a child dying or a suicide or a car wreck, I've seen people broken from that, literally broken to bits.
Yeah, and I agree. And in my experiences too, looking and dealing with families after tragedy, a lot of it car wrecks, especially when I was in Alberta, in Canada here, small towns with highways running through them. It was friggin' crazy. I think we had one fatality every 3 weeks in a town of 11,000 people. It was crazy. Anyway, I look at the person, the broken person, the person who is suffering as a result of the trauma, and I look at them as a candlelight that others are, or whether they're flocking around that candlelight or being pushed away from that light, that it's that individual who's suffering with the trauma is actually his suffering, he or she's suffering is making others around them do something. So they're so their suffering has caused, like if you didn't have 10 people suffering, you wouldn't have a group of people who support those who are suffering. Yeah. So those groups had to exist, because, and if there are 10 people in that group and one person feels better and actually leaves from the group and continues life, drops that weight off their shoulders and walks out of the group, maybe that's all it was supposed to do. Just fix that one person. So it's like we all have a piece of the puzzle, and our piece may change in shape off and on, but we're all still part of the same picture. anyway, we could go on for days, and we've already gone on way longer than necessary. Not necessary, but we've got longer than I promised. Our hour and 20 minutes. We're almost at the 2-hour mark. So I better kind of let you get on with the rest of your day. Now, I'm really now looking forward to seeing the book come out soon. Remembering the Light, How Dying Saved My Life. And please, anybody wants to follow Rosemary at Rosemary Thornton on the Facebook. She is there, and her website, which is being tweaked and should be coming out with her when the book hits. Anyway, her website's going to be completely different. But if you want to get a hold of her, you can go over to her website. And plus, if you want to look at really cool old houses that Sears used to sell in their kit homes, you can go to her website, searshomes.org. Again, that's searshomes.org, and you can get a hold of Rosemary there if you want to continue the conversation on, which would probably drive her completely insane if you did that. But if you have actually, and if you know somebody who is going through this type of, and I don't mean a near-death thing, but a suicide. If you can't find support, Rosemary might be able to point you off on a path where you might be able to find support. But please don't get a hold of her for her support. I don't think that's how it works.
No, that's not how it works.
No, please.
There's so much suicide prevention awareness in the world right now. But yes, I've already had a couple people contact me and say, give me a reason not to end my life. And that's, here's
a lot of pressure to put on you right now, Rosemary. Yeah, please give me a reason why I shouldn't end my life.
It's
got the wrong number.
I'm not ready for that. And I am not a trained mental health professional. I'm just a chick who glimpsed heaven. So there's a lot of miles between somebody who's a professional and somebody who saw heaven. So yes, my email is at my website, and I'm happy to talk with people I also get a lot of emails from somebody who lost somebody to suicide, and they want to hear what heaven is like. And that I'm happy to share. That's beautiful. Well, thanks again. And thank you very much for dropping by. And thanks for writing the book. This is going to be fascinating. And I wish you all the best success with it and getting the word out there on kind of what the heck it looks like in your glimpse of the other side. And as a result of it, where you think we all will be going. Well, thank you. And it's been delightful. I've been making notes. I've learned I've got some great quotes from you. They've truly been very insightful, and I appreciate it very much. Oh, Lord. Okay. You have a wonderful day, and we'll talk again soon when your book comes out. Thank you so much. Watching you while you sleep all alone. All right, that's it. Let's roll. And hey. Let's be careful out there.